On the day Serena got married, my lover jumped from the 18th floor. When I opened his studio, it was full of Serena's portraits. The brush strokes were rough and extreme, yet they carried his vigorous love. My friend said, Felix has loved Serena for 10 years. She used to be his only light. When I opened my eyes again, I saw Felix being blocked by the school bully in the classroom, and I silently closed the door. Later, he knocked on my window in the rain, his voice hoarse and desperate. Aria, don't you want me anymore? Professor Felix, an astrophysicist, recently discovered a new asteroid. However, during an interview, he became a trending topic on the internet because of his cool and outstanding appearance. People's focus of discussion shifted from the asteroid to his almost enchanting face. When they heard that the asteroid was named after his beloved, netizens were instantly excited. While praising this fairy tale-like love, they were all trying to find out who Ran was. I held my mobile phone, and it was even harder to suppress the corners of my mouth than holding an AK. At the end of the video, the reporter asked with a smile, Professor Felix, do you have anything to say to your beloved Ran? Felix was stunned for a moment, and his pitch-black eyes like the night trembled slightly. Happy newlyweds, he said. His tone was calm, but it was mixed with an imperceptible despair on the verge of collapse. I froze instantly. What did he mean by happy newlyweds? Oh. Joy beside me bumped into me playfully. Aria, Professor Felix in your family looks so cold and aloof. Unexpectedly, he's quite romantic. He treats the wedding anniversary as if it were the wedding day. Was that the case? Looking at Felix's affectionate eyes in the video, my cheeks instantly flushed. I had been with Felix for 10 years. I had accompanied him from a gloomy teenager who was half dead to the refined and elegant professor he was now. 10 years ago, he transferred to our school and became my deskmate. The boy was as fair as jade, with picturesque eyebrows and eyes, but his gaze at me was full of impatience. Now, he named an asteroid after me. When he mentioned his beloved, his usually cold and stern eyebrows and eyes were always filled with attachment and tenderness. Today was our first wedding anniversary. I touched my abdomen and curled up on the sofa. I was going to tell him the news that I was pregnant as soon as he came back. But what I waited for was the news of Felix's death. He jumped from the 18th floor. He was tightly clutching a piece of paper in his hand. Death is just a return to the universe. After hundreds of millions of years, we will meet again in the vast sea of stars. Accompanied by Joy, I handled Felix's funeral affairs. He had made a will, stating that all his property should be donated after his death. For some reason, I was surprisingly calm these days. Seeing Joy with swollen eyes, gritting her teeth at Felix's portrait but still having to put on a brave face to comfort me, I even felt like laughing a little. After the funeral, I received a call from the lawyer. Mrs. Felix, there is a villa under Mr. Felix's name, which is not within the scope of donation. You can come to deal with it when you have time. The villa was in the suburbs in the south of the city. I pushed open the door and was so shocked by the scene in front of me that I couldn't say a word. The hall was filled with portraits. The brush strokes of the portraits were rough and extreme, so crude that they seemed like drafts casually drawn by a beginner. However, because of the vigorous and intense love in them, the people in the portraits looked vivid. That was Serena, the school beauty in our high school. For 10 years, I had never heard her name from Felix's mouth. I didn't even know that he had hidden his feelings for her so deeply. I staggered forward a few steps and supported myself on the table. There were several pieces of amber neatly placed on the table. Inside them were sealed a fruit candy, a dried flower, and a piece of broken diamond nail art respectively. The amber was smooth and round, and it was obvious that they had been often played with in his hands. The things that Serena had casually thrown away were regarded as treasures by him. However, the wedding ring that I had personally chosen for him was lying in the dried-up paint box beside it. My heart ached again, and tears unconsciously welled up in my eyes. After sitting down, I opened the notebook on the table as if torturing myself. It witnessed Felix's 10-year-long unrequited love. On the first day of his transfer, he received a fruit candy and a friendly smile from the school beauty in the front seat. It was as if a ray of sunlight had shone into his dark heart. He was a gloomy teenager who had been bullied and abused at home, and that was the first pure kindness he had received. Since then, he had fallen for her. He wanted to lock her up, possess her, and make her smile only at him. But he couldn't bear to drag such a bright her into the darkness. Ran didn't mean Ran, but Ran, in a different Chinese character with the same pronunciation. It was the wedding gift he gave her. From beginning to end, there were only a few words about me. The new deskmate is too nosy and annoying. Got married and kind of regretted it, but I have to be responsible for her. I brought him breakfast because I was afraid he would have hypoglycemia. I drove away the school bully for him. I held his hand and led him to run out of the fire scene created by his crazy father. I had accompanied and comforted him for so many years. But he didn't mention any of these. The only thing that he couldn't forget was Serena's flamboyant smiling face back then. Every word of his was like a torture on the tip of my heart. I clenched my fists tightly and took a deep breath. It seemed that the clear and cool smell of pine wood on his body still lingered in the air. I felt a bit nauseous. Some people are just despicable. They don't deserve to be redeemed or loved. I put my palm on my abdomen. He didn't deserve me to give birth to his child. I was just about to get up when there was a noise at the door. Two figures pushed the door open and walked in. It was Blake, Felix's childhood friend, and Serena. Blake's eyes were red, and his voice was hoarse. This villa was left to you by Felix. You used to be his only light. At first, he was so depressed that he almost couldn't hold on. He cheered up only by looking at your photos. Serena stood there blankly with a layer of mist in her eyes. After he was recommended for admission, he didn't originally need to go to class anymore. He just went to school every day just to see you more. At this point, Blake saw me behind the bookcase and was stunned. Then he frowned in disgust and said quickly, "Why are you here?" He walked quickly forward and pushed me away hard. "Get out of here quickly. Don't dirty the only clean place for Felix. If it weren't for you pestering him so tightly, how could he have ended up like this?" After being pushed by him and staggering, I felt a dull pain in my abdomen. I steadied myself and slapped him backhand. "What does it have to do with me? I never forced him to fall in love with me or marry me." He missed Serena because he was both cowardly and despicable himself. Serena's voice with a nasal tone suddenly rang out. "Didn't he receive the love letter I sent?" Both Blake and I were stunned at the same time. "What did you say?" "Before the college entrance examination, I put a love letter on his seat, but I never got a response from him." At this point, she gave a bitter smile. When she looked up again, there was a bit of resentment in her eyes. "It was you, right?" She stared at me fixedly. "Were you jealous of me, so you threw away the love letter? It's you who made us miss each other for a whole 10 years. Now we are separated by life and death." I didn't know about this. But Blake believed it. "You poisonous woman." He gritted his teeth and rushed at me. My stomach hit the corner of the table heavily. Intense pain hit me, and blood slowly seeped out. Everything went black before my eyes, and I fainted on the ground. When I opened my eyes again, I was holding books, wearing a school uniform, and standing in front of the storeroom. Inside the storeroom, the young Felix was leaning against the wall, with his fine black hair scattered on his forehead. There was a hint of confusion in his eyes when he looked at me. The school bully Caleb was sitting lazily opposite him, looking idle. When he saw me, the corners of his eyebrows raised, and the corners of his mouth curled up in a casual arc. "Top student, are you worried about him?" "I'm just here to have a chat with him." The feel of the books in my hand didn't seem like a dream. My hands and feet instantly turned cold, and hatred surged within me. The books fell to the ground with a thud. I expressionlessly closed the door for him and then turned around and walked away. However, the sound of the door being suddenly pushed open came from behind me. Felix rushed past me like a gust of wind, leaving only a hurried back. "Why are you running?" I just asked him why he didn't sign up for any events in the sports meeting. Caleb muttered as he picked up the books I dropped and handed them to me casually. "You're welcome." I had a bad feeling, so I quickly quickened my pace and chased after him. At the classroom door, Felix stared blankly at Serena, who was playing with her deskmate in the classroom. In the slanting afterglow of the setting sun, a soft halo was cast on his figure. His gaze was gentle and full of disbelief, as if he was trapped in a beautiful dream that he couldn't bear to wake up from. My heart slowly sank. His behavior and temperament didn't seem like that of the gloomy teenager before, but rather like the refined and elegant professor 10 years later. Felix had also been reborn. "What's wrong with you?" Caleb patted him on the shoulder without understanding and squeezed into the classroom from his side. "It's almost time for class. Don't block the way here." I followed my memory and found my seat. This was a self-study class. All the classmates around were studying quietly. I casually opened an exercise book and stared blankly at the childish and neat handwriting on it. In this new life, I definitely couldn't follow the old path again. I gradually became clear-headed, and my mood also calmed down bit by bit. Since Felix had been reborn, he probably didn't want to have anything to do with me. In this life, we would stay out of each other's way. If he wanted to court death, let him be. I had to stay away from him so that I wouldn't be splashed with his blood when he died. It was so disgusting. Just as I was thinking this, Felix's cold voice suddenly rang out. "Arya, lend me your English notes." I looked up. "What?" He glanced at me sideways, looking aloof, as if he hadn't noticed that my behavior was different from that in the previous life. Well, he was so full of Serena that he had long forgotten what I had done for him before. Hearing this, Serena turned around and said apologetically, "Sorry, I just asked Felix to borrow the notes, but he said your English was better, so he came to borrow from you." She had her eyebrows and eyes curved, making people involuntarily like her. Unfortunately, this didn't work on me. "I won't lend them. I still need to use them." It wasn't that I really needed to use them. I just didn't want to lend them. Serena's smile froze. Her deskmate Blake couldn't bear to listen anymore and turned around to retort at me. Arya, as the class monitor, it's your duty to help your classmates. Why is it so hard for you to lend a few notes as if it's going to cost you your life? Hurry up and give them. Serena is doing you a favor by borrowing from you. Don't be so stingy. His voice was a bit loud, and all the classmates around looked over. Serena looked disappointed, and there was a bit of contempt hidden in her eyes when she looked at me. Joy beside her rolled her eyes, swallowed the spicy strips in her mouth, and then started to scold. Don't try to morally kidnap us here. Why should we give our hard-earned notes to you ungrateful people? What? Just because you have bad grades, you think you're right? Seeing that the two were about to quarrel, Felix quickly interrupted. Enough. Then he turned to look at me, slowed down his voice, and said in a calm and serious tone, Arya, Serena is weak in English. Only when her English grade improves can she apply to schools in City A. I stared fixedly at him, feeling a bit sad. He didn't continue the rest of the words, but I knew that the university Felix attended in the previous life was in City A. He hoped to go to the same city as Serena to study in university, so it turned out that it wasn't that he didn't know how to do these things, but that he didn't love me. I lowered my eyes, feeling that my 10 years had been so worthless. Felix thought I was hesitating. Didn't you always want to invite me to your home for dinner? So it turned out that it wasn't that he didn't know how to do these things, but that he didn't love me. I lowered my eyes, feeling that my 10 years had been so worthless. Felix thought I was hesitating. Didn't you always want to invite me to your home for dinner? It seemed that he suddenly thought of something, and his beautiful peach blossom eyes were full of understanding. If you help Serena improve her English grade, I'll go to your home for dinner once a month. There was a hint of condescension in his tone. How could he not even know how to talk like a normal person in this new life? I finally couldn't help it and looked up to meet his eyes. Am I such a despicable person? Why should I bear all the hardships? Felix's expression was blank for a moment. He was just about to say something when the head teacher suddenly pushed the classroom door open and walked in. He held a thermos cup and announced the start of the registration for the recommended admission examination of T University. In the previous life, Felix was recommended and admitted to T University through this examination. But I didn't participate. Both Felix and I raised our hands at the same time. He looked at me with a bit of surprise, as if he didn't understand why I had made a different choice from the previous life. Arya, are you going to register too? Serena asked doubtfully. Her voice was soft as if she was mocking my overreaching. The most important thing for a person is to know one's own limitations. With your grades, you can still go to a good university if you work hard. But compared with Felix, there's still a big gap. Participating would just be a waste of your time, or are you just trying to attract someone's attention? She glanced at Felix, who was listening attentively to her, and the implication of her words was self-evident. How could she be so sure that I couldn't do it? In the previous life, I didn't participate because I didn't want to compete with Felix for the quota. His family was in difficulties. If he could be recommended for admission, he would have more time to work part-time to earn college living expenses. Who would have thought that after he was recommended, he would come to school every day to waste time, just to see Serena more? Thinking of this, I said calmly, what's it to you? Is this something that a person at the bottom of the class should worry about? Serena's eyes instantly turned red. Seeing his sweetheart being bullied, Felix, who had been silent all along, suddenly spoke. Apologize to Serena quickly. She kindly advised you. Don't be so ungrateful. Also, if you want to attract my attention, there's no need to use such a ridiculous way. His tone was cold. Don't treat your future as a trifle. Arya, don't be so childish. He was really out of his mind. I was too lazy to pay attention to him and raised my hand to signal the head teacher who was watching the show. Teacher, I want to change my seat. There's barking around here, which affects my study. Felix's face turned black and he stared at me coldly. The head teacher was a bit puzzled but still agreed. After class, I moved to sit next to Caleb. He had always occupied the last row to sleep, and no one dared to make noise here. It was very quiet, and I was quite satisfied. I finished packing my things. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Serena slightly leaning back, with her long black hair scattered on Felix's desk. The young man lowered his eyes and looked at it quietly. After a while, his fingertips moved slightly, and he gently picked up a strand of hair, looking restrained and devout. I rolled my eyes. On the first night of our marriage, he went to sleep in the guest room. Because my hair fell on his pillow, he thought it was disgusting. Was I disgusting? Did he really think that his first love was some pure and saintly woman? Without Felix, I had an unusually comfortable day. After school, the head teacher asked me to stay and help him grade papers for a while. When I got to the community, it was almost dark. A few ants walking their dogs. In the previous life, he often went crazy and beat Felix, leaving him bruised and battered all over. I always kept a small first aid kit under my desk to treat his wounds. It's not that I hadn't offered to call the police for him, but he thought I was meddling in his business. It seems that in this life, he chose not to endure it anymore. Not long after walking, I saw Felix huddled on a bench. There was bright red blood seeping from his forehead, making his face look abnormally pale. The surrounding lights flickered on and off, and the cold wind blew his messy broken hair. I suddenly met a pair of bewildered eyes. I looked away and was about to turn around and leave expressionlessly. Arya. He called out to stop me. Then, as if suddenly realizing something, his expression regained its usual aloofness. Why are you here? What was wrong with this guy? I felt it was inauspicious and quickly quickened my pace. But he suddenly sneered. His hoarse voice came from behind. Don't think I don't know. You're here to play the savior. You just love to offer a helping hand condescendingly when others are in a mess. You think I'll like you this way? On the contrary. I hate your hypocritical look the most. I was stunned. After realizing what he had said, I was so angry that I trembled all over. Was this how he saw me? My love and care for him were just condescending charity and hypocrisy in his eyes? Was it this muddle-headed fool that I had loved for the past 10 years? You're wrong. I took a deep breath and tried to make my tone calm. I'm not here to be the savior. Then I quickly walked forward and swung my right hand round and slapped him hard. I'm here to kick you when you're down. Bah, you ungrateful wretch. After slapping him, I gave him a fierce glare and turned around to leave, leaving Felix standing there in a daze. Since I slapped that ungrateful wretch last time, I felt much more comfortable, and even my breast ducts seemed to be unblocked. At school, we would also tacitly pretend to be strangers. I could hear news about him and Serena. He copied hundreds of pages of notes for Serena by hand. He fought with hooligans outside the school for Serena. He also went several kilometers to buy freshly baked pastries for her. In the past, when I asked him to pour me a glass of water, he was reluctant. Sure enough, it turns out that love is blind. I was indifferent to all this. I even wanted to curse him for being a fool. I used to love him because of his persona of being smart, sober, cold yet fragile, and having a tragic yet charming background. Now that I've left him, I'm the one who's strong. Why should I admire his strength? I'm strong myself. After leaving Felix, my life gradually got back on track. Joy thought that the atmosphere around Felix was chaotic, so she stayed with me to study and asked me to explain the questions to her. After seeing the review materials I prepared for the recommended admission examination of T University, Caleb didn't know what got into him. He stopped sleeping and started studying with Joy and me. In the monthly exam, he really improved by more than 100 points. His parents enthusiastically invited Joy and me to their home for dinner. During the meal, his mother affectionately held my hand and wanted to adopt me as her goddaughter. But Caleb stopped her. He put his hands in his pockets, looking casual. Mom, if you want to adopt a daughter, there are other ways. I pretended not to understand and lowered my head to play with the little dog jumping around under the table. The dog was so cute that I couldn't help feeding it a piece of chicken breast. The dog excitedly did 2 backflips for me. Some people understand gratitude, while others don't. As the exam was approaching, I started to carry out my review plan intensively. Felix gradually faded out of my sight. The next time I ran into him was at the entrance of the sports equipment room. The physical education teacher asked me to get the basketball needed for class. As soon as I walked to the entrance of the equipment room, I saw the figure standing in front of the door. Felix hung his head, the corners of his eyes were red, and he looked like a stray dog. The door of the equipment room was half closed, and the conversation between Serena and her friends could be clearly heard from inside. Serena, how dare you eat the things he gave you? His father is a madman. Who knows if he has any viruses on him? Her friend said with disgust. Don't say that. There's no such thing as viruses or not. Serena's voice rang out slowly. It's genes. Look at him with a gloomy face all day long. He should have inherited some of that old madman's genes. But it doesn't matter. It's just for fun. Her friend laughed loudly. Ha 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 ha, but he seems to be quite serious. I heard that in order to support you he worked 3 part-time jobs outside. It's so funny. He's really such a bootlicker. He's just a fool. He took the bait so easily with just a little flirting. Serena said. By the way, don't say such things in front of him. Act more innocently. I haven't had enough fun with this little mad dog yet. Felix's hand holding the cake trembled slightly. It must not feel good to see your first love fall from the pedestal with your own eyes. Serves him right. After hearing Serena's words, I also figured it out. Given her personality, in the previous life, she probably didn't write a love letter to Felix at all. She said that just to slander me and anger Blake. I didn't want to get involved in their melodramatic drama in this life, so I turned around and wanted to leave. But Felix grabbed my wrist tightly. Let go. I couldn't break free and was dragged outside by him. He pushed me into a corner like a madman. Those cold eyes were now filled with hatred. Did you spread the news about my father? Arya, are you satisfied now? Do you like me that much? So much that you don't hesitate to destroy my relationship with her? I was so angry that I kicked him away. We had been together for 10 years. Even without love, there should be at least basic trust. Fortunately, I had long given up hope on him. I looked at him coldly. Felix, are you having paranoid delusions? Didn't you tell me about your father's thing on the first day you transferred to our school? Like you? How thick-skinned are you? Serena was right. You're really a fool. 10 Surprisingly, Felix didn't refute. It was as if some belief was crumbling inch by inch. He slid down slowly against the wall as if he had lost all his strength and finally slumped on the ground. I looked down at him, feeling inexplicably elated. I could understand the feeling of seeing the person you loved fall apart right in front of you. After all, when I opened the door of the villa back then, I felt the same way. It's really like the wheel of fortune has turned. His messy hair fluttered in front of his eyebrows. Felix hung his head, his eyes indifferent, his expression numb, and he didn't move, leaning against the wall like a piece of broken jade, lonely and desolate. I carefully observed his desperate expression. I couldn't wait to take a picture of it and take it out to laugh at when I was in a bad mood. Suddenly, the person in front of me laughed softly. While laughing, tears streamed down his face. Ah? Had he really gone crazy? I heard his almost voiceless murmur, I was wrong. I shouldn't have. At this moment, I suddenly understood. Felix was a smart person. During this period of time, he might not have failed to notice Serena's abnormality. It's just that in the 10 years of the previous life, he had poured too intense emotions into that illusory bubble. So, he had been deceiving himself all along. Now, the filter had been shattered in a cruel way. He couldn't believe it and didn't want to admit that he had sacrificed his own life for such a person. Therefore, he shifted the blame onto the innocent me. I looked at Felix with red eyes and sneered. Whether in the previous life or this life, he was still that coward. I didn't want to see him regretting and going crazy anymore, so I turned around and left without hesitation, leaving him crying and laughing behind me. I'm not as stupid as Felix. In this new life, I won't waste time on unworthy people and make myself a mess. I had already urged my parents to invest in some emerging industries in the future. I also helped Joy improve her grades by a large margin. Not being able to get into her dream school was a big regret for Joy in the previous life. This time, she can fulfill her wish. Everything was developing in a good direction. After that day, I heard that Felix and Serena had a very unpleasant falling out. But it had nothing to do with me. The only thing related to me was that he stopped hovering around Serena and instead buried himself in his studies. Damn it. Why was he competing with me? After all, he had taken this exam in the previous life and remembered some of the questions more or less. I had to work even harder than him to win. Joy and Caleb both noticed my abnormality. But both of them tacitly didn't disturb me. On the day the exam ended, I walked out of the examination room. The sunlight was neither too strong nor too weak, spreading on the road like a satiated kitten in the afternoon, quiet and beautiful. The process of answering the questions was very smooth, and I could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Caleb was carrying 3 cups of milk tea and waiting for me at the entrance with Joy. He waved at me. His broken hair was neatly blown by the fresh wind coming towards him, showing a natural youthful spirit. I quickly walked towards them. He lowered his head and handed me the milk tea. His handsome eyebrows and eyes had lost their usual casualness, and he looked focused and gentle. Let's go. I'll treat you to dinner. After dinner, I accompanied them to have a wild time in the amusement park for the whole afternoon. I hadn't been so happy for a long time. Since being reborn, I had been on edge all the time. Today, I finally felt a long-lost relaxation. It was as if all the troubles had disappeared. A strange feeling seeped into my blood from my pores and awakened my lifeless cells. I felt like I was alive again. 12 in the following days, I became the most idle one instead. Every day, I was sent to buy food for Joy and Caleb. Early this morning, Joy kept shouting that she wanted to eat beef ramen at the south gate of the school. So during the lunch break, I dutifully went to run errands for her. As soon as I walked out of the school gate, I passed by a familiar guy with yellow hair. I heard him say, "Baby, don't worry. The guy who bullied you has been taught a good lesson by us." He led 3 or 5 younger brothers and got into the van casually. Then I remembered. This guy with yellow hair was Serena's ex-boyfriend who was a hooligan. He had come to pick up Serena at the school gate before. I turned into the alley without knowing why, but I saw Felix with blood all over his head beside the trash can. Oh, so it was him who got beaten up. Well done. The yellow-haired gang did a great job. However, I kind of doubted if I was really his jinx. Otherwise, why could I always show up on time and laugh at him whenever he was in a mess? I looked at Felix lying on the ground and raised my leg, ready to step over him, but he reached out and grabbed my ankle tightly. Still alive? What a pity. His eyes were blurred, as if he couldn't tell dreams from reality. Arya, you're here to save me again. Let go. His fingers were cold and sticky, and I felt a bit disgusted. But he held on tightly, and I couldn't break free. So I bent down and pried his fingers open one by one. His eyelashes trembled slightly, and he stared at me fixedly, with a disgusting look of nostalgia in his eyes. Arya, have you had enough of playing hard to get? I'll give you a chance to save me. In the past, I was blind and didn't know people well. Only now do I realize that only you are sincere to me. Stop joking. Let's make up, okay? I paused. Did he not realize that I had also been reborn? I had never deliberately concealed it. It's just that he self-righteously believed that I was still the Arya who would stay with him for 10 years without leaving or giving up. All my abnormalities were just playing hard to get in his eyes' attempts to attract his attention. How confident he was. I lost my patience, stood up without hesitation, and stepped on his hand that was reaching for my ankle. He let out a cry of pain and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. If you don't talk like a normal person, don't blame me for being ruthless. I slowly ground his well-defined fingers and said calmly, Felix. Why haven't you made any progress at all in this new life? His pupils suddenly shrank, and his face became even paler. Arya, wait, you also? I was too lazy to listen further, let go of my foot, and turned around to leave. 13 in the evening, I was helping the head teacher grade homework as usual. When I went home, it started to rain. The raindrops were thin and dense, and there was a lingering salty and damp smell in the air, which made me a bit restless. I was about to enter the corridor when I suddenly saw a figure standing in front of my window. I lived on the first floor. That person didn't hold an umbrella and just stood there, looking fixedly in the direction of my home without moving. I summoned up my courage and walked closer to take a look. It was Felix. What bad luck. Through the rain curtain, I saw the deep sadness in his eyes that couldn't be dissipated. Seeing me come back, he subconsciously wanted to approach me, but was stabbed by my disgusted attitude and froze on the spot. Arya. I'm sorry. The raindrops fell on him one by one, as if they were bending his proud bones. After such a long time, I finally got an apology, but I didn't care anymore. I clenched the umbrella handle. I got it. Go away. He didn't move and stood quietly in place, his eyes red. When I was standing on the roof, I was in despair thinking that I had lost my beloved forever. But after jumping off, all I could think of was you. You were still waiting for me to have dinner at home. Serena was just my obsession when I was young. Arya, the one I really love is you. I sneered. Love me? You still went to find Serena right after being reborn? You bought cakes for Serena so many times but you wouldn't even cook a bowl of noodles for me on my birthday. Do you call this love? I spoke calmly, but Felix's face became even paler. How despicable you are. Perhaps people will be trapped by the things they couldn't get when they were young all their lives. But that's not a reason for him to hurt me. Felix closed his eyes in despair, and his voice seemed to be stuck in his throat. Arya, I know you hate me, but we were together for 10 years. Give me one more chance. Let's start over, okay? I took a deep breath, trying to calm my emotions, but the anger and grievance that had been suppressed for a long time in the previous life surged up all at once. Why should I give you a chance? Are you worthy? I stared at him viciously. What I regret the most is wasting 10 years of my youth on you. When you painted the walls full of Serena's portraits, did you ever consider my feelings? When you made a will to donate all your property, when you jumped off the building for your first love, did you ever think about what would happen to me and our child in the future? Felix's head hung lower and lower, but when he heard the last sentence, he suddenly raised his eyes to look at me. Child? We have a child? Boy or girl? How old? He stepped forward in a fluster, with surprise of becoming a new father all over his face. After a while, he suddenly realized something, and the smile on his lips froze. I don't know. I said calmly, but what I said was extremely cruel. I was 1 month pregnant, and then I was killed by your first love and your good friend. Actually, I didn't know if I died or not. I just said that to hurt him. Felix finally couldn't hold on anymore. He covered his face with his hands and squatted down, and a suppressed sob came from his throat. I walked past him and entered my home. Looking at Felix crying bitterly outside the window, I just felt a sense of satisfaction. It was good. I shouldn't be the only one in pain. 14 Felix took a leave of absence from school. I was successfully recommended for admission. It was really double happiness. After the news of the recommendation came out, Joy wanted to go to Felix to show off, but unfortunately, she couldn't find him. All her energy had nowhere to go, so she put it all into her studies, and her grades soared like a rocket. Work hard for 100 days, and your dream school will become your backup school. After being recommended, I seldom went to school. I just occasionally sent some materials to Joy and Caleb. Caleb said that he wanted to go to the University of Technology with me and have a campus romance. But the University of Technology is not so easy to get into. 15 The next time I heard news about Felix was a few months later. He stabbed Serena and Blake 8 times each. None of the stabs were fatal, but they were both sent to the ICU and remained unconscious ever since. The police searched for him for 3 days, yet he was nowhere to be found, neither alive nor dead. All the classmates and teachers were shocked by his cruelty. Only I knew that he was a madman at heart. The police questioned his teachers and classmates. I was among them. When I got home from the police station, I took out my key to open the door. Suddenly, a towel with a pungent smell covered my mouth and nose. I lost consciousness instantly. When I woke up again, I found myself on the roof of an abandoned building, with my hands tightly bound to a chair. Felix was dressed in a suit and tie, standing with his back to me at the edge of the building, lost in thought. The cold wind blew by, swirling up the dead leaves and gravel on the ground. A sense of despair rose in my heart. Sensing the movement behind him, Felix turned around and slowly lit the candles on the table. Only then did I notice that the table was filled with my favorite dishes. Felix sat beside me, half of his delicate face flushed scarlet by the candlelight while the other half was hidden in the darkness. What on earth was he up to? What do you want to do? I stared at him coldly. The corners of his lips curled up into a gentle smile, and his calm eyes held a hint of unnoticed madness. Arya, don't you remember? I still owe you a wedding anniversary. What a load of nonsense. He was really crazy. I stared at him firmly. Let me go home. You can't hide with me for long. As if he hadn't heard my words, he filled a bowl of soup for me on his own. This is our first anniversary. I made your favorite pork rib soup. Have a taste. I couldn't bear to listen anymore and interrupted impatiently. Felix, have you lost your memory? Do you need me to remind you? His hand froze in midair. On our first wedding anniversary, you used a video camera to confess your love to Serena. You abandoned your wife and child and jumped from the 18th floor, still longing to reunite with her in the vast sea of stars. Do you remember now? My tone was full of sarcasm, and Felix's eyes instantly turned red. He reached out and hugged me in his arms, pressing his cheek against my side neck, coaxing me in a half-coquettish way. Let's have a good time today. Let's not mention these things, okay? After so many years of being together, he knew too well how to make me calm down. In the past, as long as he acted coquettishly towards me, I would soften my heart and comply with him. But now, I just felt disgusted. I kicked the dining table. The wine bottle toppled over on the table unsteadily, and the dark red liquid spilled all over him. He didn't care and wasn't angry either. He just raised his hand to gently stroke my cheek, looking at me with a deep gaze, as if he wanted to imprint this scene in his heart forever. There isn't much time left, Arya. There was a smile on his lips, and his dark pupils were as calm as the night. What time? I felt a bit uneasy and subconsciously moved away from him. Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you anymore. Noticing my movement, his tone was bitter. I didn't believe him at all. Suddenly, the sound of police sirens rang out in the distance. I immediately breathed a sigh of relief. When being questioned at the police station, I had volunteered to have a locator installed on me. I went home alone also to lure Felix out. He bent down and gently kissed my forehead, as if making a final farewell. I heard his soft sigh. Arya, how did we end up like this? It was all his own doing. If he hadn't been so obsessed with Serena, if he had taken responsibility from the very beginning, perhaps we would be a happy family of 3 now. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. Fortunately, there were no ifs. A blinding white light suddenly shone on the roof, and I narrowed my eyes. In the next second, several red dots gathered on Felix. He stood up, looking at me reluctantly, and backed away step by step. I raised my head and met his gaze. There was no surprise in his eyes, and his expression even had a touch of relief. At that moment, the hairs on my body stood on end. I suddenly realized. He knew that this was a trap set by me. Moreover, he had no intention of escaping at all. When he reached the edge of the building, Felix stopped. He gave me a reassuring smile, calm yet desperate. Arya, I'll atone for my sins with myself. How dare he? My eyes widened with anger. Felix! Stop! How could he get away so easily? I didn't want him to find such an easy way out. He had hurt me and others, and he should spend the rest of his life repenting in prison. Arya, I love you. The cool wind on the top floor carried his soft whisper and also messed up his broken hair. Then he leaned back. In a daze, I seemed to be back in that summer afternoon again. The air was damp and stuffy. The walls of the teaching building were old and peeling. The young man tilted his head to look at me under the creaking fan, his ears slightly red, and his voice clear and gentle. Arya, do you like me? After the college entrance examination, we went our separate ways. Joy did well in the exam and went to University in the neighboring city. We would occasionally get together during long holidays. Caleb was dozens of points short of the admission score line of T University. Although he could still go to a good university, he chose to repeat a year of study instead. I sent him a full set of the new edition of 5-year college entrance examination and 3-year simulation. He was so angry that he didn't reply to my messages for 3 days. Blake and Serena were so seriously injured that they became vegetative patients. There was no knowing when they would wake up, and naturally, they didn't take the college entrance examination. College life was busy and fulfilling. I tried many new things that I hadn't touched in my previous life. Compared to my previous life, I might not be more outstanding. But I was happy. After all, being happy is the rarest and most magical ability. Although the previous life was difficult and painful, it didn't prevent me from falling in love with the world again. In the second semester of the new school year, as a department head, I went to welcome the new students. Several junior students gathered the courage to come and ask for my WeChat. I smiled and refused them one by one. Then a familiar voice rang out. "You guys are no good. Watch me." I looked up. In the sunlight, the young man casually leaned on his suitcase, looking across the crowd and meeting my gaze from a distance. "Senior sister, do you want to be in a relationship? My dog can do backflips."